This is a historic piece of legislation that delivers on President Trump's key campaign promises. I mean, at the rallies, we heard no tax on tips, and that got enormous applause. It was so popular that Kamala Harris plagiarized it like she does so many things from President Trump's agenda.
What happened to Elon Musk? Nothing. He's upset he's losing his EV mandate, and he's very upset about things, but he could lose a lot more than that. I can tell you right now. Hey, Elon can lose a lot more than that. We might have to put Doge on Elon. You know what Doge is? Doge is the monster that might have to go back and eat Elon. Wouldn't that be terrible?
Welcome to Undercurrents. Thank you so much for joining us. I am, of course, joining just one more time from beautiful Aspen, Colorado. I'm about to head back from the Aspen Ideas Festival, where I was a media fellow this year. And I wanted to dive into the crazy back and forth that's been happening between Donald Trump and Elon Musk over this one big, beautiful bill that has for months sort of been hanging by a thread because it has to be passed through something called reconciliation. That's why this is a bill that is accomplishing tax cuts and immigration policy through basically in one fell swoop. Now, Republicans have often campaigned for speakerships, by the way, for just one example, against this idea of governing with these big packages. But when you have a slim margin in the Senate and, of course, in the House as well, it's basically nowadays one of the few ways to get big things done. You have to tie it all together to create incentives for other members to get on board with things. So, like, for example, they've been trying to sweeten the pot and get Lisa Murkowski, very centrist Republican from Alaska, by putting in some things in the bill that would benefit Alaska. That is what's typically called pork. The definition of pork is sort of always up in the air, but in this case, they're definitely giving everybody a little bit of something to get to the middle. Elon Musk hates it. Elon Musk is saying that it's shameful for anybody to vote for it. Of course, it does take an axe to a lot of the energy subsidies that the Biden administration put out. So that does affect green energy investments, basically the green energy industrial policy. I think it's fair to say that the Biden administration passed, and that policy benefited a lot of red states. So with jobs and investments and all of that. So it's been a real process for the party to land on anything that could pass. And the 11th hour has been jammed with negotiations. It actually reminds me a lot of when the Affordable Care Act was passed by the Democrats in what was that, 2010, 2009, 2010. So it's been a really, really messy process, which is why I think Donald Trump branded it preemptively as the one big, beautiful bill. But he is now, Elon Musk is saying it's shameful for anybody to vote for it because Musk believes that it's going to increase the debt and deficit. I think that's clear. People like our guest today believe that the Congressional Budget Office, which calculates these numbers, is wrong about that. And he's also been going back and forth with Elon himself in defense of the one big, beautiful bill. And that's James Fishback. James is the CEO of Azoria. It's an American investment fund. He also has a group called Incubate Debate. And he's been all over X, going back and forth with Elon Musk, trying to explain why, from James's perspective, Musk is wrong about the big, beautiful bill. But this is about more than a piece of legislation. This is a massively consequential piece of legislation. It has huge investments in immigration enforcement that will be like a shot in the arm for the Trump administration's immigration policy. It is a massive tax cut. It does things like no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. So you see the Republican Party sort of lurching in a different direction from where it had been in the past when that 2017 tax cut bill was passed. That bill actually galvanized a lot of the new right over from a debate on child tax credits. So people like Marco Rubio, Mike Lee, emerged from that tax process, the process of the 2017 TCJA, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, having really reshaped, I think it's fair to say, the perspective on government, I don't want to say subsidies, but tax incentives. It wouldn't be right to say subsidies because we're talking about tax breaks. So that's just money that you already have that the government is taking from you. So it's always, these big bills always move the party or help people understand where the party is going and sort of have clarity on where it's been. So without further ado, let's get into the muck with James Fishback. James Fishback, CEO of Azoria, an American investment firm. Also, he is with Incubate Debate, a really cool debate group. So, James, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Emily.
James, last time you were on the show, we were talking about how Elon Musk had come around on your idea of a Doge dividend. And I believe you guys were in contact. Now, though, you and Elon Musk are, dare I say, at odds over the one big beautiful bill that looks like it's on the cusp of passing as we are recording this. And there are a couple of different categories of criticism on the right of the big beautiful bill. The Josh Hawleys think that it leaned too heavily in the direction of austerity. Now, he'll probably still vote for the bill. He'll definitely still vote for the bill at this point, from what we know. The Elon Musks actually think that there wasn't enough sort of what you could call austerity cuts, codification of Doge. And James, you think both of those criticisms are missing the mark. Can you walk us through a little bit what you mean?
Absolutely. The truth is, and Josh Hawley's an interesting example, but I'll even take it a step further with Elizabeth Warren, right? Elon Musk is saying that the bill doesn't have any cuts. It actually has an increase in funding, which is categorically wrong. And Elizabeth Warren is saying that there are too many cuts. Actually, I can't believe I'm saying this, but Pocahontas actually has a point here. She's right. There are a record of $1.2 trillion of cuts over the next decade that are effectuated by the big beautiful bill. That's possible with things like rolling back Medicaid for working age able-bodied men. They should not be forcing women out of a program, competing with deserving women, deserving families for life-saving healthcare when they themselves can get a job and quit being freeloaders. And so I can understand Elon's position, but I want to just clarify, this bill in fact does have spending cuts. And so that's the first thing. Now, the second thing is this concern about, well, there's a debt ceiling increase. So I think, part of it is, yeah, in theory, you don't want there to be a debt ceiling increase. But Emily, you and I have been around DC long enough to be cynical about this stuff. When you put the debt ceiling increase in the big, beautiful bill, you prevent the Democrats from using it as a token, as a pawn against President Trump at some later date to force their agenda on him and say, look, well, we won't increase the debt ceiling unless you do this, that, or the other. And the last thing to note, and Vice President Vance touched on this late last night, is what the big, beautiful bill does for the border. It secures the border like never before. Through Trump's leadership, we've seen a 99%, literally a 99% reduction in border crossings. That's good because illegal immigration costs the taxpayer upwards of $150 billion a year. But if you want to double down on border security, you want to increase the AI on the border, fortify the border both physically and technologically, and also give CBP and ICE more personnel and more resources to send a lot of these bad guys home, you've got to make the investments that the big, beautiful bill does. And so, yeah, net, there are $1.2 trillion of spending cuts. There's a couple $100 billion here for ICE and CBP in the border, but that is really not new spending so much as a strategic investment to prevent the inflow of more migrants who, you know this well, Emily, they are a net drag on our economy. They take up housing that would go to Americans. They take up jobs that would go to Americans. They take up taxpayer resources that would go to Americans and are paid for by Americans. So if you're serious, as Vice President Vance said last night in a tweet, if you're serious about the long-term debt sustainability of our country, you've got to tackle the migration problem. And that's exactly what the big, beautiful bill does by making a record investment in border security.
It's hard as somebody who's been around DC for a while, and Elon Musk is a very successful defense contractor. He's been around DC for a while as well, but it's hard not to read naivete into his assumption that there could be even more cuts. That in this bill, it's a reconciliation bill, meaning they basically have to keep every Republican senator happy. They can only lose a couple, and it's just with you when you have Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. I don't know, James. I mean, you've sort of been in Elon world adjacent kind of through some of your work recently. Is it naivete? Is he trying genuinely to start like an American AFD? Like he really wants an austerity party in the U.S. and this is sort of an obvious opening. What's going on?
It's a good question. I think it's a mix of naivete and bravado. And maybe it's naivete that's being used to justify that bravado. He tweets last night at midnight, I just don't want to see America go bankrupt. Okay, well, if you don't want to see America go bankrupt, vote for the largest spending cuts in history, which is what this bill does. Of course, there could be more spending cuts. But the truth is, and Secretary Besson has talked about this, when you want to talk about tackling debt to GDP, Emily, there's the numerator, which is debt, and there's the denominator, which is GDP. We are not going to use austerity and use spending cuts to pave the way to prosperity. That's going to be part of the equation. But the way you get rich is not by cutting your expenses down by 50%. You've got to pull back your unnecessary expenses. You've also got to increase your income. And so when President Trump puts in no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, let's functionally talk about what that does from a purely economics standpoint. It increases the all-in real wages of workers, which increases the incentive for, let's say, I don't know, the 7 million working age men in America who are not working or looking for work to come off the sidelines and to give back to the economy, to seek a job, to earn wages, and to pay taxes and pay into that system. That's good for the economy. That's good for GDP. That brings down debt to GDP. The only way to bring down debt to GDP long term in a sustainable way is not just by tackling the debt numerator, but by actually bringing up the GDP denominator. That's how you can close that gap. And so that's really what matters here. And so I think this is a real debate that's happening in the party. Americans didn't vote for fiscal austerity. They did not vote for fiscal austerity's sake. Emily, you've been to Trump rallies. I've been to Trump rallies. There was nobody chanting in the crowd that we want a balanced budget immediately. Yes, we want a balanced budget, but we don't want to go the way of Greece and Eastern Europe, where those budgets were cut to the point that it actually held back growth. And so let's be clear, there's $1.2 trillion in spending cuts, but yet the CBO, which is partisan, let's be honest, the CBO also says that the big beautiful bill is going to increase the deficit. Well, how objectively is that possible? And the CBO doesn't allege that the deficit is going up because of increased spending. Quite to the contrary, again, $1.2 trillion in cuts. What the CBO is saying is that the deficit is going up for, get this, more Americans get to keep more of their money, right? So when you say that the government deficit is going up because of tax cuts, it is a direct inverse to say that there is now a surplus for the average working American who gets to keep more of what they earn and the government gets to steal less. That is a good thing. And in the process, we actually revive the American economy by taxing folks less, letting them keep more of that for the millions of workers who are on the sidelines saying, oh, wait, I actually can keep more of what I earn on overtime, on tips. That money goes right back into the economy. And so the debt to GDP ratio, which is really the North Star for Economics 101 these days, that actually comes down not just through debt reduction, which this bill does, but actually through increasing GDP, which is the long-term way to get to real prosperity, right? If you've got kids at home you're caring for a family and you got kids at home and they want to punch above their weight, they want to do great things, they want to enter the golden age, you can't just tell them we're going to do that by cutting their spending. You can do that in some respects, but you actually have to open up prosperity for them. That's what this bill does. And the number one thing that is threatening prosperity in America today, Emily, is unvetted, cheap migrant labor that's coming across the southern border, that because of Supreme Court decisions of the 1980s, those same students have to now go into classrooms in America. Classrooms, by the way, and you've covered this well, where young, Black, Hispanic, white, it doesn't matter. Those students are struggling with literacy because of the stupid mistakes made by Biden and Fauci during the pandemic. And to add insult to injury, those same students who are struggling, you've now got 30, 40 new students in that grade, in that rural high school in Florida, from Cuba, from Senegal, from Guatemala, who are now taking attention and resources away from the students who actually deserve to be there. So the long-term threat to prosperity in this country is illegal immigration, and I'm proud that this bill tackles that in a real way.
So part of what you just said, being actually is not in disagreement with Elon Musk, that like the bill could be better, and basically everybody agrees with that. The question is,
I think Trump agrees with that.
Yeah, and the question is, how much better could it be without tanking its passage. And that gets to a problem with the Republican Party. You just mentioned this. If the Republican Party were serious about a balanced budget, if the Republican Party were serious about putting a hole in the, or I should say, digging out of the hole that is the debt and the deficit, the Republican Party would look a lot differently. And that, James, I don't know, it feels like going into the next 5-10 years, this happened with the Tea Party too, and Trump sort of came in and you taught the Republican Party the right way to think about the Tea Party, what the voters were actually talking about when they were out there protesting and organizing. That to me seems like the big, I guess, iceberg that the Republican Party has to avoid, is sort of like coming up with an actual fiscal plan, because we've already seen challenges to the dollar, for example. I mean, this is your work. These things are really serious and getting more and more urgent. So I don't know. Do you think that this sort of exposed the urgency, the severity of the divisions, and the urgency of maybe overcoming them for the right? Hey everyone, to watch the rest of this interview, head on over to undercurrents.tv, where you get the full versions of all of our interviews, also all kinds of other good stuff from Unheard. So undercurrents.tv, you can subscribe there. We'll see you back here soon.